We now move on to the next item of business, which is a statement by Angela Constance on the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. I call on the Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, thank you for this opportunity to make this statement today. On the 16th of September last year, during Stage 3 of the Victims' Witness and Justice Reform Bill, I made remarks that referenced the position of Professor Alexis Jay. What I said during that debate has been the subject of significant scrutiny, and the First Minister's independent advisers on the Ministerial Code made it known on the 22nd of December that they would independently investigate this matter. They have now delivered their conclusions to the First Minister. Presiding Officer, their report has been published, but I will outline briefly the conclusions, which are that I made 2 breaches of the Ministerial Code which were unintentional, and I quote, "inadvertence without any deliberation or intention to mislead." The advisers also said that, and again I quote, that this is at the lower end of the spectrum provided for in the Code and therefore does not call for anything beyond a reproof, which should be formal and in writing, accompanied by a statement to Parliament by Ms Constance to clarify the words used and thereby add to the official record. End quote. Presiding Officer, I accept fully the independent adviser's report and sanctions. I have received the approval from the First Minister, which I of course accept and apologise to him. In addition, I am providing this statement as quickly as possible, and I thank the Bureau for agreeing to that, to both inform Parliament and carry out the adviser's recommendation that I clarify my words used and ensure this is therefore in the official report. Presiding Officer, during Stage 3 of the Victims' Witness and Justice Reform Bill, Liam Kerr lodged amendments that sought to add research on child sexual abuse and exploitation to the remit of the Victims and Witness Commissioner and to require the Commissioner to provide a report to Parliament within 3 years. During the debate on those amendments, I intervened in relation to the discussion on data and, as is well known, made the following remarks, and I quote, "It is important that we get the right type of data, and that work is, of course, underway." Is Mr Kerr aware of the work led by Professor Alexis Jay, who was the chair of an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in England and Wales, and who currently sits on our National Strategic Group? She shares my view and has put on record and stated to the media that she does not support further inquiries into child sexual abuse and exploitation, given the significant time and resource already spent in the review that she led, the Casey audit and other reviews. She says that it is now time that people should just get on with it. I contend that this is what the Scottish Government is doing right here, right now, and we are getting on with the work that we need to do to protect children. End quote. Professor Jay wrote to me on the 26th of September noting, I correctly quoted her, but that her comments were in the context of a public inquiry in England and Wales, not Liam Kerr's amendment, and the Scottish Government should urgently take steps to establish reliable data, and that she has already begun discussions with officials about how that might be achieved, and she also asked for her position to be clarified. Officials contacted Professor Jay on the 3rd of October, proposing to take forward that clarification at the meeting of the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, scheduled for the 8th of October. Professor Jay agreed to that route for clarification. The clarification was made at the meeting and the minutes published on the 18th of November. Presiding Officer, the independent advisers have noted that my statement on the 16th of September was factually accurate in 2 respects. First, the quotations I used were made by Professor Jay. Second, the quotations had been put on the record by Professor Jay during a Radio 4 broadcast in January 2025. Professor Jay agreed with the accuracy of the words used in subsequent correspondence with officials. That is in the public domain. However, the independent advisers have reached the view that the context, content and detail of the debate were significant and that listeners might understand different things from the words used. The independent advisers concluded that the phrase I used, and I quote, Professor Jay shared my views, had the potential to mislead Parliament, and the record of Parliament should have been corrected in the same terms used in the National Strategic Group minutes as soon as possible after Professor Jay communicated her views on the 26th of September. I would therefore now like to make clear that during the debate on the Victims' Witness and Justice Reform Scotland Bill in Parliament on the 16th of September, I quoted the views of Professor Alexis Jay on calls for further inquiries into child sexual abuse. I would like to clarify that Professor Jay shared these views in January 2025 in a radio interview in the context of her work on the independent inquiry in England and Wales, and they were not related to the debate on the Victims' Bill or the position in Scotland. The matter has been considered at length by Parliament, including most recently through a session of the Education Committee on the 17th of December, where Professor Jay and I both appeared. While those opportunities have resulted in Parliament being widely informed of the full context of Professor Jay's remarks to remove any suggestion of those being misrepresented and Parliament misled, I accept the conclusions of the independent advisers that I should have sought to make a statement, and, Presiding Officer, I apologise to you and Parliament for not seeking to do that sooner. The independent advisers also considered my phone call to Professor Jay on the 1st of December last year, in which I apologised to her. Whilst I took a note of that discussion, and the independent advisers acknowledged that this was an error of judgment in the moment and not deliberate, and in that sense inadvertent. The independent advisers concluded that the call should have been attended by an official in terms of paragraph 8.13 of the Ministerial Code, and I accept that conclusion unreservedly. Presiding Officer, having made this statement to clarify matters and making clear that I accept the conclusions of the independent advisers on the Ministerial Code, I hope we can now turn our focus to the work that we must do together. Presiding Officer, let me finish by saying again, I fully accept the report of the independent advisers. I have always stated I did not intend to mislead Parliament in any way in what was a long Stage 3 debate on an important bill where we debated over 170 amendments. I am pleased that the advisers have made clear that my quoting of Professor Jay's views was, again I quote, without any deliberation or intention to mislead. I therefore hope now that this addresses this matter in full, and that we are all able to focus on how to effectively address and prevent the horrific and insidious criminality involved in the exploitation of children and support victims. Thank you.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. I'd be grateful if members who wish to put a question were to press their request to speak buttons. And I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. On 18th of December, John Swinney told me, I am content that there has been no breach of the Ministerial Code. He repeatedly suggested over many weeks that there was nothing to see here. Well, John Swinney was wrong, because his discredited Justice Secretary, Angela Constance, did breach the Ministerial Code, and she breached it not just once, but twice. And I've been telling John Swinney this for weeks, but he put his SNP friend above the truth, respect for Parliament, and for grooming gang victims. And we only have these official findings today because of the sustained efforts of many Scottish Conservative MSPs. This is the first breach. Having misrepresented the views of a leading expert in child sexual abuse, Angela Constance failed to correct the record. The independent advisers described this as a significant error. The second breach, failing to have officials present during an official government phone call with Professor Jay. This saga has all the hallmarks of John Swinney's government: cover-up over candour, self-preservation over integrity. Can Angela Constance tell Parliament whether she's offered her resignation to John Swinney? And if he won't do the right thing and sack her, why won't she do the right thing and quit? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful to Mr Finlay for his questions and scrutiny. Of course, the strength of having independent advisers is that they undertake an independent process and they have the freedom and the right to come to their own conclusions. I repeat what I said in my statement. I accept the independent report by the independent advisers in its entirety, including their commentary and including their conclusions. And what I have sought to do today is to address the matters that they recommended that I take on board. I, of course, have had time to reflect. As I have said before, the record could have and should have been corrected earlier, and a statement to Parliament should have been made earlier. I am now making this statement to Parliament so that matters are now fully on the official record. And my final remark to Mr Finlay is that for some people, walking away is always easier than being held to account. I would much rather take the harder road of being held to account and to making amends and getting on with the job.
Thank you. I call Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, this has dragged on for 102 days because of Angela Constance and John Swinney's inability to do the right thing and at the right time. Had Angela Constance put her hands up and said, "I made a mistake," this would have been done. Instead, John Swinney and Angela Constance put party before country and, even more shamefully, put party before victims of grooming gangs. Independent advisers have now confirmed that Angela Constance breached the Ministerial Code not once, but twice. This investigation should have been triggered by John Swinney, but instead he followed the culture he's created from the top, one of secrecy and cover-up, putting his party before country every single time. This is the man that tried to withhold evidence from the Salmond inquiry. He was out defending Michael Matheson over the iPad bill, and he did the same with Angela Constance. So does the Justice Secretary agree that the most important people here are actually the victims and survivors of grooming gangs and child sexual exploitation? Because she has the confidence of John Swinney, and she has the confidence of her party, but she has lost the confidence of the victims and survivors of grooming gangs. And on that basis, shouldn't she resign?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the facts of the matter are all now fully on the record. They have been independently scrutinised. I appeared at the Education Committee before Christmas and made extensive statement there, and I'm here today to account for the position and to accept in full the requirements of the independent report. What I have always accepted is there is no monopoly on wisdom or endeavour or in commitment to victims of sexual abuse, whether that is adults or children. And I think when people look at my record in the round and taken through one of the largest, most transformational victims' bills in the history of devolution, I think I can say with some confidence that I have made a contribution that has made history with, for example, the abolition of not proven, a contribution that will make a difference going forward with the establishment of the Sexual Offences Court. What we all need to do to now, and this is where I do think we have unanimity across Parliament, is that we have to focus on our children, how best to protect them in an ever-changing world where the threat to our children, their well-being and their safety is ever evolving. I have never demurred or detracted my attention from that priority, and I never will.
I call Audrey Nicholl to be followed by Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I note the report of the independent advisers on the Ministerial Code said that the 2 breaches of the Ministerial Code were unintentional and, I quote, inadvertence without any deliberation or intention to mislead. And the sanction is formal reproof and, to clarify words, for the official record. So does the Cabinet Secretary believe that this statement fulfils what is required of her now in relation to the adviser's report on this issue?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, Presiding Officer, I do. The report is very clear that the issues here was an inadvertent error. It was, as I've said before, never my intention to mislead Parliament in any way. This was a comment I made during an intervention in one amendment of 174 under consideration that evening. Nonetheless, I won't for a minute walk away from the importance of candour and openness with Parliament in these matters. I have always striven to demonstrate that in all aspects of my work. Have I had to make amends? Yes, that is what I hope I am doing here today, and will continue to do with the work that I will lead in collaboration with other colleagues across government.
Liam Kerr, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Presiding Officer, I choose to believe the Cabinet Secretary did not intend to mislead when she intervened on me in September. But the failure to correct the record in the face of many colleagues and voices in Civic Scotland highlighting the error was, I think she would acknowledge, a monumental error of judgment. It was disrespectful to Parliament, and worst of all, it was a shocking abdication of responsibility to victims of this most abhorrent of crimes. So a straight, closed question begs a straight answer. Between the 3rd of October and her appearance at the Education Committee in December, was the Cabinet Secretary advised by anyone in her private office, by her special advisers and/or by the First Minister's office to correct the parliamentary record?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, what I can say to Mr Kerr is that I have had much to reflect on, and when it comes to regrets, I certainly have a few. And my commitment, my ongoing commitment to Parliament is that I do not and will not abdicate any of my responsibilities. I'm not going to repeat what the evidence that I gave to Education Committee, because actually it is now the judgment of the independent advisers and the conclusions and recommendations that they make. Was I given advice? Was I given advice? The answer is no. But what I don't want that to be misinterpreted by, I'm answering a straight question because that has been the challenge put to me. What I do not want to demur from 1 minute is what rests with me. I ain't for a minute pointing the finger at SPADs, officials or anybody else. And this may be of little interest or consolation to members of the opposition, but the biggest critic of me is me at the end of the day. So this rests with me. If there are where action has to be taken, where there has to be accountability, that rests with me as a minister. That is what comes with being a minister. And as I said to your colleague earlier, walking away is always the easy option, but standing up and being accountable for your actions is the harder road, and I'll take the harder road each and every time.
Always through the Chair, please. Rona Mackay, to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, you breached the code in not having an official with you during the telephone call you held with Alexis Jay on the 1st of December. Can you explain your intention behind that call?
Cabinet Secretary.
I said before, Presiding Officer, my intention behind my call to Professor Jay was to apologise to her when the focus was on remarks that I made in chamber as opposed to the substance of the very grave issues that we are all contending with. I was apologetic for any inconvenience or intrusion that she had as a result of my actions or inactions or my comments. As a politician, as a minister of some years' standing, I have always valued the independent experts and the role that they play, particularly experts such as Alexis Jay, who are leaders in their field, who have spent a career, a lifetime working to protect our children and improve the measures to ensure that more of our children are safe. There is nothing more important to me, there is nothing more important, I suspect, to this chamber than the protection of our children in this ever-changing world where the harems are ever evolving. And what I regret, amongst many things, is any inconvenience to Professor Jay or in any way for her feeling the fact that she had to write to me in the first place to clarify the position. I very much regret that. And in the context of our society, where experts are often debased, I regret very much that my actions have brought an expert into the spotlight when the spotlight should always be in politicians.
McNeill, to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you. In the Justice Secretary's own words today, the independent advisers had reached the view that the context, content and detail of the debate were significant and that listeners might understand different things from words used. But it was these words that did mislead MSPs and the public, but it's much worse than that, because it served to undermine the confidence amongst victims. Ask the Cabinet Secretary how she will regain that confidence amongst the victims. Taylor, a known victim, was on a list of 46 children that Police Scotland were worried were being sexually exploited. I still do not have answers as to what has happened to the other 45 children. I asked the Cabinet Secretary today, what has happened to these children that we think might have been sexually exploited? And will this be a priority for response?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, let me repeat to Ms McNeill what I have said, that I do accept the independent report and all its conclusions and commentary, so I accept that report in its entirety. And what I seek to do, along with colleagues in education and elsewhere in government, and indeed with opposition members, is to play my part and a leading part in addressing the concerns of victims. The length and breadth of Scotland, I think I have a track record in providing results to victims with one of the most significant landmark pieces of legislation that this Parliament has passed. I do note that that bill that I passed wasn't unanimous. I accept that we will all see the mountain from different sides. But my commitment to Ms McNeill and others is to continue to work collegiately across Parliament in the best interests of Taylor and other victims.
Fulton McGregor, to be followed by Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, you have taken through 3 major bills in just the past year or so, including the landmark one that you've just referenced there. That combined with numerous statements in this place, so I think it's fair for all of us to assume that you're familiar with the processes and have corrected the record before. So can I ask how you are normally made aware if there is a need to correct the parliamentary record and where you are advised to do so in this case?
To remind members of the requirement to speak through the Chair. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I think in hindsight, let me put on the record again, I should have sought to have corrected the record earlier. At the time, I thought the matter was dealt with. And yes, I have spoken a lot in committee and Parliament in the past year. And as I said before, my remarks were used in an intervention as part of a 2-day debate on what I consider to be a transformative bill, a bill that many victims consider to be transformative. There are a number of ways in which matters can be drawn to your attention. depending on what the issue is. It can be via officials or stakeholders, which, to be fair, it was a stakeholder in this instance, it was Alexis J who first wrote to me on the 26th of officials, and then with me, and it was then officials who corresponded with her and then advised me of the approach to clarification that was agreed with Professor J at the time.
Maggie Chapman, to be followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her statement. In it, she expressed hope that we can now focus on how to address and prevent the horrific and insidious criminality involved in the exploitation of children and support victims. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us more about the Police Scotland review of historic child sexual abuse cases? What is it intended to achieve? Is it about how investigations were handled? Is it about identifying patterns? Or is it about exploring other avenues of inquiry? And how will this work integrate with that of the NCA?
Could you just remind members of the issues raised in the statement, Cabinet Secretary, if you could respond in that regard?
I'll be certainly delighted to follow up with Ms Chapman in more detail in writing, but obviously Police Scotland have a pivotal role in detecting and disrupting criminality. It has always been the case that Police Scotland cooperate with other police forces across the UK, and in particular the National Crime Agency, which is a UK-wide organisation. The National Crime Agency always make the effort when they're in Scotland to engage directly with me. But the important point here is the multi-agency collaboration. So it's the work that Police Scotland will do, and the work in terms of the national review, whether that's with the Care Inspectorate, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary in Scotland, the Inspectorate of Education and Health Improvement Scotland. And I have to stress that this issue requires a cross-government, cross-society response.
Green, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is the first day back after recess, and this Parliament is now notably distracted by two debates about the conduct of its members. The Cabinet Secretary knows fine well that it is what we say and the words that we use which matter, and particularly matters to victims. In the vote of no confidence debate, we came to a very considered conclusion that the Justice Secretary's position was untenable, and I'm afraid to say that position has not changed. But I must ask the Cabinet Secretary this. Does she, in light of this now 3-month-long saga, and really in the cold light of today's report, honestly, and I mean honestly, still believe that she commands the full confidence of the entirety of Scotland's justice sector, including every single victim of crime in this country?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Green is quite correct, Presiding Officer, when he says what we say matters, but also what we do matters. And what I have done, along with support from Mr Green, is pass a victims' bill that wasn't without its controversy. So I know the views of many, many victims, and of course victims will have different views about different politicians. Many victims have views about those who didn't support the Victims' Witness and Justice Reform Bill. Many victims have views about those who didn't vote to abolish the not proven verdict, despite their commitment to that. So it's what we do that matters. But I accept that we will all come to this from different perspectives, as will victims. And I am confident that most people will look at my contribution, first and foremost, as a grafter, as somebody that is prepared to wrestle with difficult issues and have difficult discussions. And I think most people will look at me in the round, perhaps imperfect, but first and foremost, they will look at me in a balanced view and look at what I contribute as well as my feelings.
Jackie Dunbar, to be followed by Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I note the independent advisers on the Ministerial Code said, and I quote, "The issue here is not about honesty or truthfulness. There is no evidence that Ms Constance knowingly misled Parliament, nor was the statement inaccurate or untruthful." Professor Alexis J also said the quote was accurate. Does it remain the case that that the Cabinet Secretary had no intention of misleading Parliament when she made this statement during an intervention on Liam Kerr in relation to his amendment?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I want to emphasise to Parliament that I take my responsibilities to this place extremely seriously, in the same way that I do to the people that I serve as Cabinet Secretary for Justice. And I had absolutely no intention to give the impression that Professor Jay was commenting on Liam Kerr's amendments or to risk that impression forming. I don't want to repeat evidence that I gave earlier, because actually what is now important is the view of the independent advisers, and I accept the finding of the independent advisers in terms of the significance of the debate, in terms of the substance. I accept that more could have been done explicitly earlier, and I accept the recourse that the independent advisers have recommended that I take.
Sharon Dowie, to be followed by Katie Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary has acknowledged that this episode became about her conduct rather than the victims and survivors of grooming gangs. Given the damage that this caused to the trust in her government, will she now apologise directly to those victims for allowing her actions to distract from their need for justice and protection?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am sure that I'm on record as saying, and if not, let me do so again today, that the last thing I would ever want to do is add to the distress that victims and survivors have already experienced in their life. And this goes back to the point that Mr Green made, which is actually something I believe that all politicians should reflect on. And it is that what we say matters, but what also matters is what we do.
Katie Clark, to be followed by Douglas Ross.
A great deal of distress has been caused to victims, and as the Cabinet Secretary says, what we say matters. She now says she accepts she should have corrected the record. Does she accept she should have come to the Chamber with a simple apology a number of months ago, rather than these weeks of prevarication? And did she consider making such a statement to Parliament following the discussions with Professor Jay on 3rd October regarding what clarification should be made?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I accept that victims and survivors live with a great deal of distress. I won't repeat my earlier remarks, and I also won't repeat in full, but I will reiterate that I accept that I could have came to Chamber earlier.
Douglas Ross, to be followed by Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary has been asked a couple of times today about correcting the official record, and in response to Liam Kerr, she said she had received no advice about correcting the official record. But we know from paragraph 13 of the Independent Adviser's report that, and I quote, some officials had canvassed an opinion that Parliament may not have been misinformed. They were clearly wrong. But who were these officials? Were they independent civil servants, or were they SNP special advisers? And what did they do with the information they canvassed? And secondly, was the Cabinet Secretary personally interviewed or spoken to by the independent advisers? Because if she wasn't, how can they come to the conclusion on the second breach that it was an error of judgment in the moment and not deliberate? Or if she was interviewed, what was her explanation that this was not in the moment, but in fact 4 days had elapsed between her requesting a private call and actually having the call on the 1st of December?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I cannot provide the information that Mr Ross seeks, because I do not know who the officials were directly. In terms of the very extensive evidence that I gave to Mr Ross and the committee that he chairs, I had received Professor Jay's letter. And what I am now saying to Parliament is that I should have acted upon that letter at the time. The matter was left in the hands of officials. Who did what? I know there is a lot of information out there on the public record in terms, or publicly available in terms of freedom of information requests, etc. But I can't stand here and provide the detail of the information that he's requesting in terms of here and now.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary believe that with the publication of the Independent Adviser's report that this should now be an end to this matter and the Cabinet Secretary and Parliament can move on and concentrate on implementing the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Act?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do very much hope that, Presiding Officer, and what I would want to stress to Parliament in response to Ms Harper's question is that even amongst all of this, I have never for a minute been distracted from the day-to-day job or the work that needs to be done to implement the Victims, Witness and Justice Reform Bill.
And Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary said that she would rather be held to account than take the harder road. But every time an urgent question was brought forward to this chamber, the Cabinet Secretary was nowhere to be seen. Or if she was in the chamber, the questions were being answered by a junior minister rather than herself. So that, in my view, is dodging accountability and responsibility of her portfolio. It has been mentioned by colleagues that the Cabinet Secretary has become a distraction. I agree with them. I do believe that she has. I do believe that the Cabinet Secretary has become a distraction not just to the review, but also providing the much-needed confidence to victims and the confidence that they need to have in this government. So will the Cabinet Secretary now do the right thing and step down from her position to ensure that we have a clean slate and we can move forward with a review on grooming gangs to get the answers for victims who have been impacted?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, when I attended the Education Committee before Christmas, I acknowledged that the urgent question that would have rightfully have been for me to answer was the urgent question tabled by Mr Kerr on the 19th of November when I was travelling on government business. And at that time I certainly should have written to Mr Kerr to, of course, offer to engage in any way that he seen fit on that matter. I have answered urgent questions in this place. Indeed, there was an urgent question on a similar related matter by Ash Regan that was very much focused on Police Scotland activity around the deterrence and disruption of grooming gang type activity. Other questions in terms of the way that they have been drafted have indeed rested with education colleagues to answer. But what I do stress is that this has to be not just a cross-government endeavour, but a cross-parliament endeavour, because it's a cross-societal endeavour in terms of how we best protect our children.
Thank you. That concludes the ministerial statement. Douglas Ross for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Earlier today, sources to a newspaper stated that Angela Constance would not be resigning or sacked as Justice Secretary. Those sources made those comments to the newspaper before any MSPs in this chamber, certainly opposition MSPs, had seen the independent adviser's official report, their view that the Cabinet Secretary had breached the code twice but would not have to resign or be sacked as a result. That suggests that party political sources within the Nationalist governing party had access to the independent adviser's report before others and briefed it out. Given your respect for this Parliament and this Parliament being informed first, will you request of the First Minister that he launches a leak inquiry as to how that information got into the public domain? Because at that point it should only have been with the First Minister and perhaps a few in his inner circle, but the findings were clearly leaked to a newspaper before Parliament.
Thank you. I have been in the chamber all afternoon, so I'm not aware of the points that Mr Ross raises, but Parliament will be only too well aware of my view that all important announcements are made to this Parliament in the first instance, and that must always be the case. We'll conclude that item of business there. I'm aware of the need to protect time for our next item of business. I'll allow a momentary pause for front benches to organise themselves.